let us go ahead and get started. Before we do, I cannot believe I'm still asking this question, but Nathan or whoever can answer this. For folks who are calling, for residents who are calling in by phone, it is, just remind me, please, it is *9 to raise your hand, *6 to mute and unmute, right?
Yes.
Beauty. Thank you. Alrighty then. We are. All right. Everybody's ready? Let's get this rolling. All right. It's my pleasure to call to order the Thursday, October 22nd, 2020, preliminary 2021 budget meeting of the Abington Township Board of Commissioners. Let us please start with a roll call.
Commissioners Thompson.
Here.
Brodsky.
I'm here.
Ball.
Here.
Carswell. Here. Rothman.
Here.
Vaughn. Myers.
Here.
Capone.
Here.
Bowman. DePlacido.
Here.
Weingrab.
Here.
Vehy.
Here.
Shriver.
Here.
Becker.
Here.
Here. All right. Let us all please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic
for which it stands,
one
One
nation,
Under
under
God,
God,
indivisible,
indivisible,
liberty and
with
justice.
for all.
and justice for all.
Yes.
All right. Okay, so this is actually the first budget meeting I've ever presided over. Hopefully it'll go smoothly and quickly. And I guess for introduction to the budget, we'll turn things over to Manager Manfredi.
Thank you, President Spiegelman and members of the board. As you know, this is the introduction and the presentation of the budget. It's the first that it is being presented to you and to the public. And in fact, you received your PDF versions today. And I'm sure that there'll be a lot of discussion, including the public discussion held in November. I want to begin by saying that fiscal year 2020 has been a challenge. When we moved forward with the budget last year, there was a lot of discussion about cuts and how deep those cuts were, and that we might be facing a tax increase, a likely tax increase, if we were to keep services where they were. And then the pandemic hit. The coronavirus, COVID-19, became a reality. And in March and April, the world changed. And certainly Abington Township changed with it. We had to immediately begin to model and forecast what the impacts might be to the people that we serve and with the services that we deliver. We found very early that there was going to be a very large impact, and that the impact would not only be in the current year, 2020, but also, more importantly, from the perspective of the next year's budget, the 2021 budget, that it would affect us. We had a lot of discussions. I convened a meeting of the top businesses and employers in the township and asked them what they saw and what they thought. Based on that, based on all of the historical information, including our tax office and earned income tax and business privilege tax collectors, and asked them what they foresaw. We projected that this year we may lose up to $3 million in revenues, and next year somewhere around $5 million. Sadly, those projections were pretty close and were fairly accurate. So we immediately took necessary steps to reduce costs in this year, both in general operating as well as in our capital budget. Those measures did take in taking those necessary steps, did reduce the our costs, the furloughs and reductions in part-time wages across all funds is somewhere in the neighborhood of $2 million that we did not spend, $1.7 million that we did not spend in capital. Of that 2.2, and roughly 1.5 million was the general fund. And we did in fact lose, and we're projecting by the end of the year, 2.5 million in the general fund as well. What's important to note as I talk about these numbers and the losses and the things that we've done is to remember that this is sad. This is painful. There are a lot of people that are part of the Abington Township family, employees that were furloughed, laid off, lost hours. There are positions that are going to be laid off as part of this budget. It is very sad. It is difficult. And to those people, I want all those family members to know this was not an act or a decision that was taken lightly without thought to the impacts on your lives, but it is the obligation, the duty to fiscal responsibility that has driven all of the actions that have been taken. And to that end, there are so many people that need to be thanked throughout the course of the year for watching every dollar and every penny. And there's virtually every director and every manager in every department that deserves credit for any dollar saved. There's a few people, I think about Nancy Marshall and their library team, that what they sacrifice with the volume of people that come through that library and doing everything that they can to deliver services, including now curbside, while there's a clamoring among some for going inside. There are the Parks Department, Angelo Pontelandolfo and his team, the remarkable job that they did to allow people to get out and swim without any infections and at some cost, but the great effort to get the pool ready in a short time. And I can go on with all the things that have been done. Lieutenant Porter in the police department at the direction of Chief Malloy, all the steps that they have taken to watch every dollar and what they have done in this budget. So I know that this is the introduction and I'm presenting this budget as the township manager, as it is my responsibility. But without acknowledging all of those things and all of those people and all of those people who were furloughed, I think I would be remiss. So having said that, let me just say in the preparation of this budget, this could not have been done without the work of every director and every manager, especially Jeanette Herman, who is the finance director, Monica Embry, who's the manager of financial services, Terry Castorina, who works in my office, Ms. McIlvain, who works in my office, Mr. Porter, Mr. Malloy, and so many others that just did a remarkable job in making sure that everything that we are trying to accomplish, and let's not lose sight of the fact that our goal was to reduce every cost we can, but to also make sure that we are providing the same level of service without any cuts in services next year. So I'm pleased to say that all of this work throughout the course of 2020 and up until last night when we were continuing to sharpen the pencil, we have a budget that is being presented to you that has no tax increase. The total budget this preliminary budget for operating and all capital funds is $67,483,908. The general fund alone is $44,471,000. And I want to mention that the fiscal year 2021 general fund budget, and that's including maintaining the level of service in the police department and public works that everyone is used to, is at a level that is $80,000 less than what we spent in fiscal year 2020. So we are not raising taxes, and we are maintaining the level of service, and our total expenses are less than last year. That is not without a lot of work this year and a lot of work that is planned for next year. And I will say that again, it can't be said enough that this was a team effort across the board, and I especially don't want to lose sight of those people that sacrificed with their families with the loss of income. Now, having said that, we'll move forward with the presentation this evening.
Rich, If I may, just very briefly, and thank you for that introduction that helps put things in preliminary perspective for us. I just want the record to note that Commissioners Bowman and Vaughn are both present. They joined us just after the roll call, so they are both present. We're all here.
Thank you, sir. Ms. McElveen, slideshow. Is it up?
I see it.
Yes.
I do not. Okay. I do now. So let's begin with some housekeeping items. So the budget calendar, as you know, was intended to be very different for this year. And then as the virus hit, all the plans that we had for discussions at Finance Committee and other public input went by the wayside. And as you know, we really didn't have a strong picture until August as to what our revenues are, which is one of the reasons that we've modified, even though our schedule still has this meeting in October, the schedule is somewhat modified because of that. But as you can see, we have this introduction and presentation here this evening. We have the consideration of adopting a proposed budget for, and again, the public meeting November 12th. That's tentatively scheduled to begin at 6 p.m. If it changes, it'll be published. And then, of course, we'll immediately that following Monday, depending upon what changes occur that evening, publish it. It'll be published for 20 days as required by law. And it is tentatively set for Thursday, December 10th, 2020 at 6 p.m. for adoption. So the calendar for 2022, again, the idea is to begin the strategic planning process. And I'm going to talk very little bit about that tonight, but you will see it in the budget message that the strategic planning process will begin in March of 2021. And I won't insult your intelligence by reading everything to you, but what's clear is that what we had hoped to do in 2024, 2021 will be the schedule for 2022's budget. And I do believe that now that we understand how we're operating with Zoom and other things, that we should be able to keep to this schedule without great difficulty. The highlighted in blue areas are the strategic planning process. As you know, this budget, and which started last year with the board's desire to plan more effectively, we started the strategic planning process. It was done later than we had hoped, but we had consultants who worked with us every step of the way and led and guide us through the process to make sure that what we did was accurate and that what we did represents where we're going in the future. And I'll talk briefly about that this evening. But as you can see, there are a number of steps that we're going to take that we did not take this year that we hoped to have done, but we will plan on doing next year. Next slide, please. So in the current strategic plan, what was found was these 5 focus areas. And one of the things that we did, and what you know, is that the executive management team moved forward with creating an environment led by the consultants, Mr. Letcher and Mr. Stipp, who are professionals in this field. And we surveyed the public, and they came up with these 5 areas: infrastructure, fiscal sustainability, economic growth, innovative, high performance or performing organizations, safe, inclusive, connected, and sustainable community. And these 5 focus areas, which differ from the comprehensive plan, but everything will be integrated together, are what came out of this year's strategic planning. And again, the strategic planning is done to be the basis for all things and all expenditures and tie all programs, projects, and spending together. So as you can see, this lists those priorities. And the interesting thing was the 84%, approximately 84% of participants agreed with these 5 key focus areas. And those participants were the public that responded to the survey. Next slide, please. So, I often find myself turning to Lincoln, and when you're trying to understand what you're trying to do here. And in this particular case, the one thing that was very clear to me is one of his quotes, that you cannot escape the responsibility of tomorrow, by evading it today. And we are not going to do that. We have a responsibility to tomorrow. We have a responsibility today to make sure that everything we do focuses on tomorrow, or else what we've done in the past 10 years, the past 3 years, certainly this year, was for naught. So I think that where our focus is on tomorrow, but we have to do this today, which is why this strategic planning and all the steps that we've taken are for the future. Next slide, please. So as you know, we have what is the value of a mill and how is a mill calculated. Our total assessed value for 2021 has gone up slightly, which frankly is a little different than it was last year. And given the number of assessment appeals, it has gone up slightly this year. Our collection rate has remained the same. So you see that the value of one mill for 2021 will be $3.384 million. And again, this is as of 9/30. That number, that total assessed value isn't finalized by the county until November, but given the timelines that we're trying to work under, trying to get a budget to you sooner than later, we have to project. We feel this is pretty strong, and I think we'll be near where we need to be. So the value of a mill for 2021 is $3.384 million. What does that mean to the typical property tax? Well, a property owner will pay $1 in property tax for every 1,000 of taxable appraised value of property. If the Montgomery County assessed value for an Abington Township homeowner's property were set at $150,000, then 1 mil of taxes would equal $150. At the proposed tax rate of 4.851, the average township taxpayer will pay $727.65, an increase of 0 from 2020. So if your property remained the same, because we're holding the property tax rate the same, you will see no increase in the township portion of your tax bill. As you see, we have the note there that says only the property tax. It does not include trash and sewer fees. So while you'll see the trash and sewer fee, you certainly will not see an increase in the property tax. So what is that tax distribution? The numbers are roughly the same as they were again last year. So when you see your tax bill, everyone sees their tax bill and they think, look how large this is. Our police department must be costing us a fortune, or our public works must be costing us a fortune. It's important to note that in that total tax bill, 78.5% of it goes to the school district, and the portion that goes to the township is 12%. So it's that, that distribution of that total tax dollar is very different. That 727 is very different from what I'm sure what everyone is paying if you're at that $150,000 value. Next slide, please. What does that tax rate mean in terms of revenue generation? Well, as you could see in the numbers from 2020 to 2020, they're relatively flat. The variances are close, within $2,000 or $1,000 for each of the levies that we have. We levy one for general purposes, the fire tax, the library tax, and the park and rec tax. Now, these are all under general levies. They're not special levies. They are earmarks. So general is what it is. Fire, library, and park and rec are earmarks of general, not a special levy. The special levies are ambulance debt service, and what we instituted last year is OPEB. Now, for example, we had a difficult year in tax revenues. If not for the fact that we earmarked, and this Board of Commissioners in particular earmarked those dollars for the fire service, they would not be able to continue to do all of the work they're doing and meet their 5-year strategic plan. And they are doing just that. So earmarking and dedicating funding, especially when you have to increase taxes, is a way to actually show where the money is going and why it's important to continue to demonstrate accountability for the dollars that are being collected. Next slide, please. This is a slide that is important for a couple of reasons. The township has had, beginning of 2014, I believe, instituted a fund balance policy. That fund balance policy was there for a reason, to make sure that there was attention paid to raising revenues when needed and not just always dipping into the rainy day fund. Had this rainy day fund not been maintained, had the steps that have been taken each of the last few years to focus on the need to generate income for specific needs, such as the fire companies, that fund balance that is currently at 11 million would be much lower. So in this particular frame, this chart, you see total operating revenues at 39 million. That is $5.3 million less this year than it was last year. That's that hole that we talked about, that we projected, that the downturn in the economy, the shutdowns and everything has had on our budget. So when we looked last March and looked at this and said, where could we be? We could be in that $5 million. That's why we took the measures that we took, froze capital spending, limited, if not froze, operating expenditures, and of course took the extraordinary steps with reducing personal service costs and employee reduction of cost. So we were trying to offset by saving money this year to keep that fund balance higher, so that we were able to not dip into the rainy day fund as much as we absolutely had to, and to also make sure that there was fund balance available according to the policy that was established by the board, and we've accomplished that. So with this, you could see that the general fund is balanced with the 39 million in revenues and 5.3 from the fund balance as an appropriation, totaling 44 million in the general fund. So that means that where we begin the year, if we are in fact, if revenues are where forecasted, that we will end up with a net surplus of 6.1 million going into 2022 in the general fund. We have a different balance in the capital fund. Next slide, please. So this is the fund balance policy reserves and allocations that I was just referring to. We project that on January 1 of this year, or 12/31/2020, that fund balance is going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 11.545 million. You could see expenditures of 44,469, again, less than what they were in 2020. And then you'll see, based on the calculations of the fund balance policy, what the cash reserve equals for 1 month's operating, 2 months operating, and 3 months operating. In other words, if we want to make sure that we have the equivalent of 3 months operating expenses, we would need to make sure that we had $11 million. And because we're not transferring money, or we're not proposing to transfer money at this time from the capital back to the general, because that's where it comes from, we will be using that 5.3 million will be coming from the amount of money that's available for allocation based on the fund balance policy of 7.8. So I can answer questions clearly between now and next week or at any point in time, but I just want you to see the impact of how the fund balance policy and where we are works. And that previous chart showed what that balance will be January, and it's mathematics in addition and subtraction to get where we are. Next slide, please. So with that said, Ms. Herman is going to take it from here. She is going to get into the revenues and the expenses in greater detail and show you those numbers. But there are two things that we had hoped to show you tonight, but I think it's going to be more appropriate to either make that video another time, or if time permits this evening, we had a video presentation put together for you tonight. But again, in the interest of time and what's happening in the world and what other people have indicated to me that they would like to get to later, I'm just going to make this statement. In 2018, it was something that I had done in Warminster, and it was something that when I first arrived, Mr. Michelow and I discussed. And what that is the creation of a team comprised of people and talent that we have here in Abington to go out and do work in the construction, in stormwater and other things. And what you will see, if not later tonight, another night, is the work that they've done in 2018, 2019, 2020. For those members of the board who were here at the time that we proposed this, there was a lot of discussion as to, would this really save us money? Would there be any benefit to this? Well, what you will see is that in each of the last 3 years, if you include what we charge out for labor, we will have saved $1.9 million in capital expenses by doing it in-house ourselves with our construction services team. The other thing that this budget does, and the reason I'm pointing this out, is because we were watching, not only are we watching every dollar and how we spend it and saving it, we watch every dollar and how we spend it. By doing things the way we're doing and things that, the general public does not see on a regular basis, because we have the talent that we have, because we have an assistant director of engineering who's also manager of construction services, and Mr. Tim Clark, who understands that world. We are renting portable non-metallic mineral processing plants, crushers, so that he can crush rock, crush stone, make our own product, and do the work ourselves at a great savings. So when you see those savings, and when people look at this budget and they see the capital expenses for stormwater projects, the projects that we've begun this year, and if you remember, you may remember some of them, you will see these numbers and we will present them because we think it's important for the public to see exactly how we're saving them money every day and how we do business and how we're doing things more cost effectively. So I only want to touch on that because it is important that we understand that as you look at the capital projects and capital spending, and also to know that it's not just a matter of watching every dollar, how we can spend it, but we're watching every dollar and how we spend it. With that, Ms. Herman, if you would take it from there.
Yes. Hello, everyone. Good evening. We can move on to the next slide, Ashley. So the biggest point, I guess, of this slide, this represents the appropriations for 2021 and 2020. And not only can you see represented here the decreases in the budget, but it demonstrates the efforts the departments have taken. We would have normally anticipated the budget to go up maybe $2 million next year, but because of the tremendous efforts of everyone and because of those personnel service costs that we saved, not only did we save money in each budget, but the entire total went down by $454,000. We can move on to the next slide. And the next one, we're going to move into how do those property tax dollars get spent? Everybody likes to know where it really goes. And so in the township here, the general fund, as we know, houses, the police department, public works, finance, and whatnot. And that's the bulk of our major cost centers. We also have a refuse department and a refuse fee that goes along with that, with a permanent improvement fund, which we have funded through that fund balance policy over the years and through other means. Highway aid, which is supported by the liquid fuels tax that we receive each year, and sewer operations, which is supported by the sewer fees that we receive each year. We can move on. So to get into the weeds a little bit, our total revenues we're expecting are really, this shows 44 million, but that's with the support of the fund balance. We're really only truly expecting revenues of 39 million, just a little over $39 million, as a significant decrease due to the pandemic and primarily in the tax categories, business taxes, whatnot, not the property taxes, but business taxes. We can move forward. So in each item, I kind of tried to look at where the most significant differences were. There were differences in every line item, but here we have the pilot program. Well, that was adjusted because the tax rates went up in 2020. And as we know, that's payment in lieu of taxes. So those agreements are based on what our tax rate is. So that was an adjustment to that figure. We're not anticipating as much in business tax refunds next year. So business tax refunds on the revenue chart, this might get a little confusing and I apologize, shows as a negative. It shows as an offset to the tax revenues. So in 2020, we anticipated $100,000 in refunds. And in 2021, we're only anticipating $60,000 in refunds, thus the $40,000 difference. Prior year tax settlements, due to the agreement with Old York, as was discussed at the board earlier this year, we're anticipating another $69,000 next year in addition. And then we start moving into those categories that are decreasing due to the pandemic and COVID-19. And these are our business taxes that are struggling. And Rich mentioned that he met with the businesses and there are several categories that have gone down here and it adds up. The deed transfer tax, although home sales are strong due to mortgage rates and things like that, we do expect it to level off and reset. And so we're expecting a small decrease there at 135,000. Rents from properties, so due to the transfer station revenue rent was actually going into the Fund 1 instead of Fund 14 refuse. Well, now that the transfer station has been that process has changed. We will no longer receive that grant. Pension state aid, as we have all seen this year, grants and other state funding has declined because of the pandemic. And we expect no different in the pension state aid. It went down 3% this year, and we're expecting it to go down another 5 to 6% in 2021. Refunds are down a little. That was due to an adjustment we made in how we allocate our revenues. There were revenues that were going into refunds that were really for police reimbursements. So we moved those out to a reimbursement line. And building permit fees, again, with the pandemic, we're not certain that the permit fees will be as strong as they were. We had bumped them up a little bit in 2020, and we decreased them back just $100,000 for 2021, with the hopes that, as we've seen throughout the fall, construction, renovations, things like that have picked back up since the governor's orders have been modified. Next slide. General fund expenses. We've gone over this a couple times. We're at $44 million. Often everyone sees, they see the police department as 50% of that. But as we know, the police department, is out there in the community, in the township, keeping us safe, doing all those things we need them to do, always at risk. We have all of the other departments here. That 44 has gone down slightly from last year by that $80,000, which mentioned earlier. And I would have normally expected that to rise a little bit, but we did, we being the departments and the township manager and everyone really worked hard. The efforts were very tremendous. It was a year-long process. I think the departments worked in the budgets longer than they expected to. We really started right when the pandemic hit, every day, every week, talking about budget. Where can we cut this year? Where can we cut next year? What can we do? What can we change? And everybody was very proactive. Next slide. So in the salary and wages, and when I say all groups, I mean both unions and the salary clerical group, it only increased $227,000. I would have expected that increase to be a little bit greater than $600,000, but due to the service cost reductions and whatnot that we spoke about previously, it is only rising $227,000. Longevity is one of those contract items that is required. There were some changes in the collective bargaining agreements that increased that number by $172,000. Gasoline expenses, as we all know this year, gasoline prices rose a few months back. And of course, the township also had to pay higher fees and expect to continue to do so in 2021. General materials and supplies, a little different. So the construction services crew that we were speaking about a few moments ago were being, not only were the wages, but their supplies were being paid from the Republic Bank note that we've had that will be closing at the end of the year. So their supplies were moved back into the general fund budget, representing $67,000 of that $67,800 increase. Uniform expense, again, another collective bargaining agreement item, it went up a little bit. Part-time wages and all these items below this is all based on those personal service costs that we reduced throughout. So we have all of those there through medical benefits. Contracted services, there was a larger reduction in admin related to planning that we had to budget in 2020 as an extra item, and we were able to reduce it for 2021. General insurance is actually specifically related to workers' comp insurance for the fire department under the State Workers Insurance Fund, and we expect that rate to go down in 21. It went down slightly in 2020, and the projections are for it to go down a little greater in 2021. Contingency expense. Everyone had seen that the contingency expense had to be bumped up a little in 2020 due to some of those personnel matters we were working on earlier in the year. That can now be reset to the 150, and it's being decreased back down by $335,000. And the last item there, the transfer to retiree health. So the United Healthcare is our retiree health insurance company, and not only did they come in with a decrease in rates from 2019 to 2020, they came in with another 6% decrease for 21. You'll see that decrease there with the $53,000 in savings. Next slide. Residential refuse fee, this looks the same as last year. We're not proposing any increase in the refuse fees. We were able to keep the refuse fund expenses and revenue stable. thus not needing any type of an increase. The rates will stay the same per can size. Sewer budget, same story. The sewer fund is actually doing well. They one of the bond payments dropped off a little bit, so that was why they were able to stay stable with their rates and not have any type of an increase for 21. Next slide, please. So we're just going to touch base on capital a little bit. Capital is very thoroughly explained in the budget book, which I know you have all received online. The most important part of this slide, and I won't bore you with all of the detail on this slide, but the last few lines, starting with the total available for fiscal year 2021 appropriations. So at the end of the year, we are thinking that we will have $8 million available. And I should back up. This is specifically for capital PI fund. This is not general fund. So this is for the capital, where all the capital projects are, for where we buy vehicle purchases and other types of large projects. So we're thinking at the end of 2020, beginning of 2021, we will have $8.4 million in that budget. Appropriations for 2021 are at $5.3 million. If we spend all $5.3 million next year, which may or may not happen, depending on how everything plays out with the pandemic and what we can accomplish, we're anticipating at the end of the year still having $3 million in the capital fund budget that we could use then for 2022's plan. Next slide. This is just a summary. Like I said, most of the details in the budget book. You can find all of the different projects for all of these departments in the back of the budget book there in that section. So this is just an overview. The difference between the amount on the previous slide with the 5.3 is the fire department. The fire department's capital is supported by the fire tax specifically, and then the remaining 3.4 is supported by general fund, or permanent improvement fund and general fund transfers that we've done in the past. And that's all I have for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeanette. President Spiegelman, and if we could go back to that last slide, there are 2 points I want to make on this capital. Number one, the general government, that amount of money, the largest share of that, $250,000, as you recall, we budgeted $250,000 last year for the financial software. We have been moving slowly with that. We are near finalizing the software. So we do not believe we will spend any of that this year, but we will commit to that. So that 250 of it is that software that we talked about last year. The other thing that I want to point out is we have worked through all of the grants, and we are now showing grants rather than a $220,000 every year grant. When you look at the line items in the capital budget, you will see that we are showing what our obligations are for each grant in the capital fund by category. So we're in excess of $1 million that you're seeing in here for grants that you have not seen in the past. So that's another reason that it looks like the numbers are going up, that's why. And additionally, again, one of the reasons I highlighted the construction services, and as Ms. Herman pointed out, a lot of the dollars that were being spent were from that construction loan note. I call it a line of credit. That is ending. We are paying as we go now for these projects, and everything is being done in-house in engineering and public works. So there are key expenses, and it's one of the reasons why I wanted to highlight the work, because a lot of the work that's being done through our grants is in-kind work being done by construction services. So we are actually becoming more transparent in how we budget and how we account for that. And when we do get into, as you recall from last year's presentations, when we do get into this new budget software and we see the public facing, where you can see these numbers live and you can have pie charts, you will see much more transparency as well in these costs. So what we've been doing is moving more and more things to where they belong, so that it's more apparent where the dollars are going, greater accountability and greater transparency. And
Rich, thank you very much for that clarification. What do you think? Would you like to pause to open things up for any questions now, or maybe better to just get through and then open it up to questions.
Well, the one question I have is, we had that brief 10-minute presentation that was prepared, but we weren't sure what the board's pleasure was going to be in terms of time this evening. So we can either tee up Mr. Clark, or we can turn and take whatever questions you may have based on the presentation, with the understanding that we clearly understand that you received this evening the budget book, and again, anticipation of having discussions beyond this evening. But of course, any questions or anything you may have that came up throughout the course of the year or this evening, it's whatever the pleasure of the board is, Mr. Spiegelman.
All right. Well, I'll tell you what. Does anybody have any questions right now before we move on? Commissioner Myers, I saw your hand first. Oh, Peg, you're muted.
Thank you. Thank you for telling me. Could we go back to one of Jeanette's earlier screens? I think it was the summary of operating and capital funds. That
There
one.
it is.
That one. There's a couple numbers here that stand out, and if you did explain them, Jeanette, forgive me. Especially the workers' comp. How do we go from 905,000 to 93,000?
I should have explained that, and I did skip past that. I apologize. And also the sewer operations. Is that your follow-up question to that? I'm sure I should have explained both of those. So the workers' comp fund, it really truly didn't decrease by that large dollar amount. What happened is we changed the methodology in accounting of how we handled those expenses. So those expenses are now spread amongst the departments and the funds that they belong to, rather than just solely being in the workers' comp fund. So it's a little misleading. Thus the little asterisk in the note at the bottom that says change in method to direct departmental chargebacks. We used to do that before, but we did it in a different way. And this we thought was a fairer way of representing it. So it just looks a little askew this year. And sewer operations has a significant decrease due to their bond debt decreasing significantly. They paid off one of their bonds this year, and so there will not be a large payment. There will be a payment for a bond next year, but not as large as it was in 2020.
Okay, and the number, the big number difference in refuse capital?
They are, yes. So in 2021, they're anticipating, I believe it's 2 trucks and one other item, the 2 trucks being $200,000. They're on a rotating schedule with their trucks. And the way it's been planned is there are 2 refuse trucks to be purchased in 2021.
Understood. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Jeanette, and thank you, Commissioner Myers. Any other questions from commissioners before we move forward? All right, Rich, let's roll on.
Well, if there are no questions, we are completed for this evening, unless, of course, you did want to see the presentation that Mr. Clark put together. Completely.
What's the use of the 10-minute presentation?
We've concluded the presentation, anticipating that we will be answering questions throughout the next few weeks. Again, I guess I'll summarize it this way. Considering that where we are with the obligations, that $5.3 million hole, the fact that we've kept expenses less than what they were last year, there will be no tax increase, no rate increase in wastewater or refuse. The focus on strategic planning going forward and all of the work that we're going to be doing next year. And I am quite certain that when March rolls around and we begin that discussion, there's going to be a lot of time to discuss the planning for the future, because we are dipping into the reserves and revenues are down. So we are going to have a very healthy discussion. Knowing this Board of Commissioners and your attention to detail, I'm looking forward to some sound fiscal and tax policy discussions for the years out going forward. But for this year, there's really nothing more to present. I'm sure there'll be much more questions as you dive into the budget itself.
All right. Well, again, thank you, Rich. And I need to just take a quick look. If there's nothing else from the board, we're going to just go ahead and move on to public comments. So we have a hand up in the participants. So if you could please let Laura in and unmute, please.
Okay. I've allowed her to speak.
Okay. All right. Can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Please go
Okay.
ahead.
Okay, so number one, I'd really like to understand how you would give a budget presentation, and the commissioners have a PDF, which apparently they just got, but residents have absolutely none. And any kind of cogent comments would come from having first perused the documents, including this presentation could have also been posted, okay, and been available. And the budget itself should have been available before any presentation so that our comments are intelligent comments, especially given, as you know, I wrote all of you about the fact that the timeline has yet again been bumped up to the first public discussion being in November, where if our comments made significant difference and you wanted to make significant changes, you would then bump up against a deadline that would not allow you properly to pass this by December. And that has happened before, and it is absolutely a problem with this particular manager letting everything go. We had budget meetings scheduled before, as you know. All of you read that, so I'm not going to review that. I am concerned about construction services and the in-house construction, because there is then no competitive bid with that. And it is a problem in that, you know, literally some of these construction projects are things that nobody could know except somebody who is taking the time in order to win a contract to put a bid together that shows that one bid, and we have had bids vary wildly, that one bid is way out of whack. So when Mr. Manfredi says we saved $1.9 million, based on what? Against bids for the same amount of those projects? So that's the problem, is that these in-house services don't have any competitive bids. In addition, you know, we said again that we're moving more and more things where they belong. Well, things should be where they belong, you know, at all times. And interestingly, I think some of these chargebacks went from chargebacks to a main item. And now this time they seem to be going from a main item back down to chargebacks to the departments. Okay, so we need to have one method, and that needs to be understood and notated. In addition, I also hope that the budget has any narrative that belongs with the department right above the department, and that it is tight and succinct. And if you want to go into a great deal of philosophy and, you know, what you're trying to do over the long term, that should be in a narrative that's separate at the end of the document or in a comprehensive plan or somewhere else.
Just so you know, your time is up. If you could please wrap up in 20 seconds.
Okay, thank you. And again, the most egregious part is that we are pushed up against a deadline, so resident comments are almost meaningless because you would have to beat the deadline to make changes. And number two, that residents are getting a presentation without any proper documentation in hand in advance. Those things are so easily fixed. Please fix them. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Manager Manfredi, since I don't see any other hands up, just to clarify, Mr. Clark's presentation, is that something that'll be made available to us online, I'm assuming?
Yes.
Excellent.
If I may just make a few comments, only because I want to make sure that everyone understands and again, this isn't a debate, but I do want to address the comments that were made. So yes, the meeting for public discussion is because of what the First Class Township Code says and the timelines that are established for the adoption of a budget. But that doesn't mean that the time between the time this budget goes up, which may be as soon as tomorrow, and certainly no later than Monday, that from that day until November, it's available for the public. We're available to answer questions. As Ms. Lehman knows from our personal experience, I've spent hours with her explaining questions and answering questions about last year's budget, and offered again at the Finance Committee, and offer again right now to do that. She's opted to send in questions to be answered in writing. That's okay too. So it's not like there isn't any room for the public to see what we're doing, to see what's proposed, and to ask questions or spend time with us. So to make it seem like there's a very short window is just not accurately depicting what the case is. It's actually, that meeting is actually for the board to make sure that whatever they do is done in public. And with respect to the winning a contract and the in-house and competitive bidding, as you know, I spent 17 years in the private sector, and I had the great fortune to be in the transportation and construction world. And I will tell you, I remember times when we were considering whether or not legislation should be passed to try to stop municipalities from doing exactly what it is that we're doing, because it was cutting into the private sector businesses. We are doing it for less money. And that's what Mr. Clark's, I don't know how to say it anyway, that's what Mr. Clark's numbers will show. He compared so that everyone could understand what market rate is for product. It's that simple. It's
Rich,
that-
Rich,
Yes,
this is Dennis. Can I say something on that?
please.
Sure thing, Commissioner Sapone, go ahead.
So our construction services crew, that's our in-house facility maintenance people, correct?
Well, we put a team together of.
Yeah, but I mean, that's
Yes.
our facilities people,
Yes,
correct?
which
There are people, there are in-house people.
Okay, now let me explain something. I've been in the transit industry for 38 years, okay? This is normal. We don't, when we're doing work, okay, except our in-house crews do that work. That's their job. We don't put that stuff out to bid. That's done by in-house. And it's the same thing we're doing at the township. Our in-house facility maintenance crews are doing the work on our property, okay, wherever it may be. That's just the nature of this business. So just to address the last speaker, that's what is done. That's normal for this business, not only for the transportation industry, for facility maintenance on any governmental property. The state has their own facility PennDOT has their own facility maintenance crews. The federal courts downstairs, governmental agencies downtown have their own facility maintenance crews. Drexel University, their own facility. They don't put that stuff out to bid. That's not the norm. What we're doing in the township is the norm. I just wanted to get that clarified to everybody. I've been in this business a long, long time. That is the norm, and the township is doing the norm using our own facility maintenance people to make repairs and corrections, additions. It's done. It's done every day. I do it every day. That does not go out to bid. Our own crews do that work. I just wanted to make that clear.
And I thank you, Commissioner. And the reason I wanted to comment to the commenter, I mean, the commenter has a right to make those comments, and I understand those comments. On its face, it may look like you're not competing, but what I'm trying to say is that the numbers that you will see show the savings that they would not be able to compete. But I understand the point. And the last thing is with the chargebacks. I thought it was a great question, and I thought it was good because it highlights a point, an accounting point. When we talk about continuously moving to show costs where they are, that's another good example where we've put those costs in each operating cost center. So you truly see what that cost is in the line item, not as a chargeback at a later time by a journal entry. So it was a great pickup. It's not being done that way anymore, but it's just, again, This is all part of the transition to changing our accounting to be more transparent. And it becomes a management tool when we start analyzing each line item and each expense. So I appreciate the comments because it gives us a chance to further clarify and help understanding.
Commissioner Bowman.
I guess we all knew we were in for some grim numbers, and now we've seen them. My compliments to you, Rich, and your team, and Jeanette for minimizing the negative impact to the taxpayers, certainly, and on the good work that you've done. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Commissioner Bowman. Are there any other questions or comments from commissioners before we adjourn and go home to do our heavy-duty budget homework?
Just one more thing, John.
Yes,
if I may.
Dennis, go for it.
I just want to say that our facility maintenance crews are doing one hell of a job. All their work is detailed, it's professional, and I'm proud of them. They do a good job on anything they touch in this township. I've seen some of the projects. I'm going back looking at the community center. Beautiful work they've done. These are professional people that we have, and we're so lucky to have them. They're good facility maintenance people. I'm in the industry, and I can tell you from experience, they do great work, and I'm proud of them.
Couldn't agree with you more, sir. Any other questions or comments? All right. Commissioner Myers.
Just quickly, we were holding the 29th. What are we doing from here forward in terms of meeting and discussing? Because this was a great presentation, and I do congratulate you on a no increase budget. I didn't think that was humanly possible this year. It's amazing. So, but at the same time, we really need to have time to look at the budget. I still want to say budget book, but we do need to look at it. There are definitely going to be questions, and also I think the public really should have another opportunity to ask any questions.
And they will. They absolutely will.
Okay. Are we holding the 29th? I don't know.
That will depend on the feedback I get from this evening.
Thank you, Commissioner Myers, and thank you, Manager Manfredi. Very briefly, before we adjourn, I also want to echo the sentiments of many that, in truly surreally difficult times, this was an extraordinary effort, this budget. And I want to echo the thanks, Rich, that you made to all the department heads, everyone who contributed, and Rich, of course, to you as well. Everyone is hurting now to different degrees, but everyone in our community, in our county, our Commonwealth, and our country, and many folks throughout the world, just absolutely been devastated by this pandemic calamity. I've said, folks have heard me say, and fellow commissioners, Rich, you've heard me say this many times, during bad times, especially, during a depression, you don't raise taxes. Now, we don't necessarily know what's coming for the economy of the country as a whole, but in our sector, the part of the public sector that includes municipalities, counties, and school districts, what we're staring down the barrel of feels an awful lot like a depression, and it's extremely difficult and painful. This was not the time to raise taxes on folks while they're still trying to get their footing in a world that seems to be, changing tumultuously every single day. That said, as folks who remember the budget discussions from last year will remember, we were actually supposed to raise taxes this year. We were slated for a tax increase. So one of the conversations one of the components of this ongoing budget conversation between now and adoption and beyond is things are going to be different next year, and everyone needs to prepare themselves for that. I mean, many tough decisions were made next year, but it is not going to be sustainable to never raise taxes. That's just a fact. But at very least, this budget this year will hopefully give people some breathing room to prepare accordingly. As difficult as planning for tomorrow is for folks in their own households and their own families, it is all the more difficult for us in the municipal public sector. But as evidence from this budget, everyone is doing the absolute best they can. So with that, thank you again, Rich. Thank you everyone, to my fellow commissioners, and thank you to all the township department heads and staff. And we are adjourned. Good night and stay safe.
Thank you.